It is the Citizen Exclusive with your host, Mpoki Thompson. A very exciting episode today. We are in Dar es Salaam. We have a special guest, the Deputy Secretary, U.S. Department of Energy, David Turk. We are going to talk about energy, minerals, and so much more. David Turk, welcome to the Citizen Exclusive.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's a particular pleasure and an honor to be here in Tanzania.
Okay, so you've had an opportunity to engage with the Tanzanian government. A lot is happening within the energy space at the moment under the current administration under President Samia Suluhu Hassan. Just recently, the government laid out its plan in terms of improving, in terms of scaling towards renewable energy. We just launched the 10-year strategy, 2024-2034. You are an expert when it comes to renewable energy. In your previous role, before you became Deputy Secretary, you were the Deputy Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. And one of your core roles was to enable countries tap into renewable energy. Can you tell us, how is the US working with the Tanzanian government to enable the country achieve its renewable energy strategy, renewable energy goals?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for the introduction of some of the things that I've done in my career. And I think first and foremost, there's a huge opportunity here in Tanzania and for the Tanzanian people to get the benefits of really some phenomenal clean energy assets. There's hydropower, of course, and that's a pretty significant part of the grid and pretty significant part of the electricity generation. But there's phenomenal solar assets, there's geothermal potential, there's wind assets as well. And so what we're here to explore is, are there things that we can do as a US government to partner with the Tanzanian government for the benefit of the Tanzanian people to get the most out of these abundant natural resources, these abundant renewable energy resources. And I came away from my discussions with the government, but also with the private sector leaders as well, that there's a huge opportunity here. But as everything in life, it's execution and actually delivering those resources, again, to the benefit of the people and the economy.
Yes, now we understand that funding for such strategies for the Tanzanian government requires a lot of work, talking to different development partners from international organizations, but also the private sector. Can you tell us, how is the US government helping Tanzania fund some of its core strategies within the energy sector?
Well, one thing that's really interesting, and most of my job these days as the Deputy Secretary of our U.S. Department of Energy is domestic focused in terms of our own domestic strategy and what we're trying to do. And what President Biden, under President Biden's leadership, what we've been doing is clean energy has been an incredible driver of jobs, not just decarbonizing our grid. We've got a lot of emissions globally. We need to do right by the planet and reduce our emissions, our carbon emissions. But what we're finding is clean energy and clean energy supply chains can be a huge job creator. Our president says when he thinks about clean energy, he thinks about climate change, he thinks about jobs, jobs, jobs. And so we're doing an awful lot of that domestically, leveraging our clean energy assets, leveraging these supply chain opportunities for batteries, for other parts that go into the clean energy products of the future that we're going to need at a huge scale. And that's a huge job creator. It's a huge enabler of economic opportunities. And so we're here not only working with the government, working with the private sector here, making sure that there's an enabling environment that allows the private sector to develop resources, but to do it in a way that really is a jobs creator and economic engine for Tanzania, but the region as well.
Okay, now speaking about the private sector, so Tanzania is currently facing a challenging situation when it comes to consistent energy supply, consistent power supply. For years, there have been calls for the government to allow the private sector to invest within the energy space, because at the moment it's the Tanzania Electric Supply Company, TANESCO, that does all the work. You have engaged with the private sector in Tanzania. Domestically in the US, you're in the space. Can you tell us about the role that the private sector can play in enabling the country achieve its energy goals?
Well, first of all, I'm a firm believer in not only having worked for the U.S. government now a few times, but worked, as you mentioned earlier, with the International Energy Agency. I also happen to be born in Ecuador in Latin America and spent years of my childhood in Ecuador, Chile, and Brazil in Latin America, but having traveled and worked internationally a good bit. Firm believer that countries and peoples in countries should determine their priorities. They should determine what mix of public sector, private sector is right for their particular countries and their particular circumstances. So we come here in a spirit of partnership, meeting with government ministers, meeting with the private sector. How can we support? How can we help achieve the goals that the president has set on the table? How can we help with our technical expertise? How can we help with some tools that we have in our tool belt to help the people of Tanzania achieve their goals going forward along those lines? In our country, and we can share what our experience is in our country, the private sector is the engine to do things at scale, and to do things at pace. It's not the government that does it all. The government sets an enabling environment. The government can offer some help on the finance piece, the infrastructure piece, but it's the private sector taking those incentives, the private sector taking that certainty of investment opportunity and really going and running with it, channeled appropriately, again, for the benefit, first and foremost, for the people in the United States context, United States citizens, but in the Tanzanian context, for Tanzanians.
Okay. You say that earlier today you met with the Deputy Prime Minister, Dr. Biteko, who's also the Minister of Energy. So recently, just last week, he tabled his budget for the 2024-2025 year, and 95% of that budget is going towards the implementation of these mega projects like the hydropower dam, the crude oil pipeline. You know, we have LNG, the liquefied natural gas. You talked about how now the U.S. is trying to work with the ministry. Can you tell us if there are any specifics on how you are helping the Ministry of Energy achieve its goal of accomplishing all these mega projects in hydro, crude oil, but also the LNG?
Well, first of all, it was a pleasure to meet with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Energy and other folks while I've been here in Tanzania. So just appreciate the opportunity and the chance to engage government to government in that kind of way. Secondly, we're sharing our experiences and where we've got some technical expertise. We've got national labs, 17 national labs across our country that help us domestically decide what's the right mix of projects, big projects, small projects. How do we think about our own future? How do we think about our electricity grid to make sure that renewable resources can find their way to consumers and find their way to industrial partners who want to take advantage of those clean energy assets? So we spend a lot of time on our grid and our enabling infrastructure. And this is the kind of expertise, the kind of partnership that we have had really good conversations, I have to say, incredibly constructive and very actionable conversations today as well. A lot of good follow-up and follow-through, I think, coming from those conversations. And I think Tanzania is blessed with a variety of renewable assets and resources. And certainly there's opportunities for bigger projects. There's also opportunities, and a lot of analysis has shown there's opportunities for solar and battery storage, especially when you think about electricity access. You think about economic opportunities of larger scale, but also economic opportunities that are from the bottom up, from communities, empowering folks to have better economic opportunities going forward. So there's a range of experiences that we're sharing, learning from what's happening in Tanzania, but of course it's for the Tanzanian people and the Tanzanian government to decide for yourselves what is the right mix.
Exactly. So I believe the primary source of energy in the U.S. is fossil fuels. That is petroleum, coal, and natural gas. Now, these are energy sources that Tanzania is trying to distance itself from as we try to move into the renewable energy space. Now, what exactly or how exactly are you helping the Tanzanian government tap into this new renewable that is climate sensitive when the fact that you as a country are also heavily reliant on fossil fuels? How does that really work?
So this is why I'm so proud to be part of this administration led by President Biden and Vice President Harris, who had a terrific visit here not too long ago, last year. We are not just talking a game on decarbonization and doing right by our own emissions profile, we're actually walking the talk, as they say. So in the Biden administration, just over the 3.5 years or so that we've been in power, we've actually gone from a trajectory of reducing our emissions overall, our carbon emissions in our country. Before President Biden took over, we were on a trajectory to reduce our overall emissions 20% to 2030. Now that's a pretty significant reduction, but that's not near where we need to be in terms of reducing our emissions given our significant energy footprint, given our significant carbon footprint. In just the last 3.5 years executing on historic legislation, we're now on a trajectory to reduce our emissions 40%. So we've gone from 20% to 40% just over the last 3.5 years in terms of all the funding, the tax incentives, the grant programs, the loan programs that we've been implementing under President Biden's leadership. So we need to walk the talk, reduce our emissions. But what we're seeing throughout that experience is there's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of jobs in this clean energy economy. We've had over 600 private sector manufacturing facilities either opened or significantly expanded because of all the investments we're making in the clean energy supply chain. It's a remarkable number of jobs, a remarkable number of economic opportunity, over $150 billion of private sector investment leveraged just from our federal investments in just what we've done so far. There's a huge economic opportunity out there. And there's a huge opportunity to work in partnership with countries around the world, including Tanzania, on value chains for these clean energy goods. And I'm a firm believer that countries, when they have mineral resources, renewables resources, the people should get the primary benefit of that. And we had a lot of good discussion today, including with the Deputy Minister of Mining, about how we can help Tanzania move up that value chain. So it's not just mining and getting the value of the materials being mined, it's how do you do the processing, how do you have the value add so the Tanzanian people can benefit from your abundant resources.
Okay, so the Tanzanian government has laid out its strategy of moving towards renewable energy, and you're trying to see how best you can enable them achieve that goal.
That's right. That's right. And because we're a big country, we're a big economy, we have a phenomenal innovation ecosystem in our country. We are making tremendous progress on geothermal energy and reducing the cost of geothermal energy. We're making investments in next generation solar and battery storage, and you name it, there's a technology laboratory and efforts that are reducing those costs and doing it at scale. And there's a lot of experiences that can be shared from our own journey to reduce costs that could be certainly beneficial in a Tanzanian context. So those are the kinds of discussions, and what we had discussions with the Deputy Prime Minister and others that we met with is, are there some of those experts, are there some of that expertise that could be useful to have these conversations as part of an overall strategy for Tanzania to get the economic benefit from our renewables.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about energy mix. Nuclear power programs in Africa, at least stable nuclear power programs, are only available in South Africa and Egypt. I want you to talk about how Africa as a continent, and potentially even Tanzania, can tap into renewable energy as part of the energy mix. We understand that there are a lot of concerns whenever a country is enabled on the nuclear scale. But what is the plan in terms of now Africa tapping into reliable nuclear power?
So certainly it's up for countries to decide if nuclear is part of the mix that they want to have existing nuclear, and then there's a lot of work we're doing on what's called small modular reactors, the sort of reactors of the future. Right now, 20% of our electricity in our country is generated by nuclear power, nuclear fission power. And so we're always happy to talk to countries if they're interested in considering this generation source, this clean generation source, to see if it's a right fit for them. But it'll be the countries that decide, the partners that decide if it's a right fit for them. We're also spending a lot of money and a lot of focus on fusion energy, which is something that gets talked about in science fiction. It gets talked about in universities and laboratories. But what we're actually doing now is taking the success that we've had in some of our laboratories. It was one of our Department of Energy laboratories out at Lawrence Livermore in California that for the first time in humanity's existence actually had a fusion energy experiment in which we got more energy out of the experiment than we put into it. Proving what we knew in theory, that fusion energy, which powers our sun, it works across our universe, is something that can be a potential source of energy going forward. So what we're now doing is spending a lot of money working with the private sector in our country with partners around the world for not just for next generation fission energy, but for fusion energy to hopefully be part of the mix that helps us all.
Okay, and Tanzania has the potential to tap into that as well.
So we're happy to talk to Tanzania, the Tanzanian government, about any potential clean energy source that they're interested in. And a lot of what we do is to reduce those costs of different technologies that make them more available, make the financing work, whether in Tanzania or across the world. And so eager and happy to have those conversations. And I was really struck by not just the words that were used in our meetings, but a lot of actionability and a lot of specificity. And so it feels like there's a lot of opportunities to strengthen our bond, strengthen our partnership.
Okay, so it's interesting that you've talked a little bit about the actionability. We understand that whenever it comes to these big mega projects, for example, the LNG, just last week, we ran a story that the Attorney General of Tanzania looked at the contract and found some sections that he did not agree with, so it was sent back for further discussion. Now, this can be a bit frustrating to any investor who wants to invest into the liquefied natural gas, and it has been ongoing for a while. I want you to talk about how now do you engage with the government in terms of actioning some of these conversations that you have so that they may not just end on paper?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And life is about execution, and life is also about timing. There's a particular opportunity for Tanzania right now on a variety of mineral resources and critical minerals. You think of graphite, you think of a variety of other resources that we're going to need at such huge volumes to power our EVs, to be the batteries of our EVs, to go into solar PV, to go into magnets, which work with wind turbines and all the other clean energy technologies of the future. So a lot of things is about timing, investment about particular timing. And there's no doubt that execution is a big deal in terms of executing, working with the private sector, working with companies, having the enabling environment in the first place to attract that kind of private capital, but then executing on the particulars of what that is.
Okay, so at the moment, what is the confidence level of the Tanzanian government executing some of these mega projects that you've talked about, candidly speaking?
So we're here to support, we're here to share our experiences, we're here to share our perspective, and to try to make progress wherever we can make progress. I'm a firm believer that real world success begets additional real world success. So whether that's in the critical mineral space, whether it's in the solar space, whether it's in the geothermal space, you name it, certainly in the clean energy space, the more megawatts come online, the more it's shown that it's possible in the real world, the more you can scale that up going forward. So that's where I think focusing on a range of projects, a size of projects, all again driven by the priorities of the Tanzanian government, the priorities of the Tanzanian people. But I think real world success begets additional real world success. That's certainly how it works in the United States, and that's certainly how we prioritize things.
So let's look at it from a continental level. Over 40% of the African population does not have access to consistent electricity. Tanzania on its own, Dar es Salaam, the commercial capital, is projected to be one of the mega cities in the future. Can you tell us about some of the ways that the Tanzanian government can be able to address this high increase of population, but as well be able to provide the critical services such as electricity?
So this is where there's a real opportunity. It's not just the fact that Tanzania has incredible renewable resources and critical mineral resources, but also has an innovative innovation engines. We had a chance to meet with a group of entrepreneurs who's working on electrification on the three-wheelers here in Tanzania. Incredibly impressive folks, incredibly impressive business model, if I can say that. It's better for the environment, it's better for climate change, but it's also cheaper in terms of how much you need to power up to fuel by electricity versus on fossil fuels. So it's a win-win-win situation. And with a young population, with a growing population, that's just a lot more opportunities for innovation. Now you have to have the educational opportunities. Certainly there's interest, and we talked about this, of sharing opportunities for experts here to interact with experts in the U.S. I think there's a lot of opportunities for further expansion and knowledge of what's going on in the innovation ecosystem around the world in ways that Tanzania, with the natural resources, but even more importantly, frankly, is the human resources, right? We need a lot of young people who have opportunities to make futures in clean energy, whether in the government or whether in the private sector, whether as entrepreneurs. So I actually view that growing population and the fact that it's a young population as a huge, huge asset and a huge resource. Now it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of really disciplined, focused efforts and making sure that, again, we as a partner are supporting in ways that the Tanzanian government and the Tanzanian people find helpful.
Okay, David Turk, on that note, it has been nice talking to you.
Perfect. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. You were with me, Mpoki Thompson, for the Citizen Exclusive. We were with the Deputy Secretary, U.S. Department of Energy, David Turk, here in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam. Until next time, that's a wrap.